to say that I am really delighted to be here, and I have for a long time known about this school because so many of our very best in the program that I direct, called the Master in Architecture, this post-professional degree program at the GST, and 3 people are coming from here this year. And honestly, we always look forward in particular to the portfolios from here. And now I have seen the reason for it. I have seen the inspiration, the work here. The place, I love the place, the light, the building itself. Anyway, honestly, it's a very exceptional school and very much one that we pay very close attention to. I also have friends here that I'm so happy to see. I do have to just acknowledge and express my regard for Ben. He too is a passionate and an exceptional individual. So exceptional in his commitment to what we love, and is loving teaching here so much. I've heard so much about it, how he's worked with the students. Anyway, I could go on. I have to say one last thing. I had a wonderful day today seeing several absolutely remarkable individual works by individual architects here, houses that are really extraordinary. It seems like a context where something can happen in reality as much as in the theory of design that happens in studios in the school. So I love this. It brings me home because my origin, I come from Asheville, North Carolina, sadly damaged now, but having always only been famous for being amazing and beautiful. I don't know if I can go home again because of what I will have to face there. But anyway, this place has some of those qualities. It really is moving me to experience it. So anyway, with that, the city that I always looked toward when I looked at my skyline of Asheville, if anyone has ever seen it, you would recognize that it is a tiny, tiny piece of the great American metropolis. In a certain way, it has that aspiration. And I always saw in it that, in my imagination, a fragment of the great city, the only city. You know which one. Although there are actually thought to be 2 or maybe 3, that would be New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. I was only seeing New York. We can talk about how that plays out. But that will be much of what I speak to today. I should say that actually I've changed the lecture. I recently came to some new thinking about something, and I thought it would be more exciting. And that was to talk about this idea. And that should be now the title for the talk. Although it ends up leading into what I called the isomorphic. Anyway, I'm just going to have to begin with a very didactic statement just to jump into this. And it would be simply this. I think it's a very helpful analogy, but also perhaps I should say in a very didactic, as I said, way that since the beginning of the 20th century, there is no other artistic medium as persuasively analogous to architecture as film. And I think it's useful not to talk about something like this because I would be, not to argue for architecture being thought of as an artistic medium. I'm not advocating that, although I do believe it is one. That's not the point here. Nor is my point to say that if you think of it as a medium, it disciplines and it conceptualizes architecture. It does do that, and that's fantastic. But that's not the point. There's something else in making this analogy for me, which is to do something we need to do more so, which is to identify the ways in which what I call the medium reformation of architecture that happened in the 20th and that brings us to today is not about the will of the artist or the architect. It doesn't come from all of that, but rather is caused imminently. It actually had to happen as it did. And causality, things caused necessarily, or that emerge independent of our own authorship are what really moves architecture. Causality is first and foremost in my mind. It always is. And it's difficult to keep it moving us because there is so much, as you know, arbitrariness, so many choices to be made in architecture. So the question is, how do we stay tied back to what has to be in architecture and what we believe is necessary? And I'm talking about necessary not only pragmatically, but aesthetically. That makes it much harder. All right, so I'll say a few things about this idea. Let's try to understand what this analogy is. I think it's pretty obvious, but I'm still going to do it. First, let me just say, most of us think about, when we think about architecture in film, we think of it as potentially a protagonist in the story or as a backdrop, as a context in which a film unfolds. So I'm sorry I don't have visuals here, because I want you just to hear me out and imagine all of this, because you've seen it, you've experienced it yourselves. I do have a movie that kind of demonstrates my point. It does, I'm sorry to say, date me. It's the Polanski film, Rosemary's Baby. It's perfect for demonstrating my point about architecture as context, as formative of narrative, as a setting for a narrative in a film. If any of you know this horror film, it's kind of a spoofy horror film, over the top, I mean, it's Mia Farrow in an early role really doing her best work. But basically, there's this woman living in a very wonderful apartment in the Dakota apartment building in Manhattan. And it turns out that her husband is conspiring to, oh my God, to have her give birth to the devil's child. Okay, it's very realistic, this film, by the way. I mean, in every way. I mean, it truly is. But, they're giving her potions, things are happening. I'm not going to give you the details. It turns out that this apartment's plan is very important in the whole narrative, because there is actually a passage in it that leads to another apartment, which we only discover is there at the very end. And this is a very terrible moment when she learns what has happened. It has altogether been going on in the rest of this, the rest of the apartment that she had not known existed. That this plot has been playing out. With a whole group of devil worshippers, and there's the baby. It's quite something. But it unfolds very much in the space, everything in the story. So this would be, how architecture in its, formation of space is developing and helpful for a narrative. But this is not what I'm going to be talking about at all. Just to first and foremost tell you, I want to talk about film as an analogy to architecture, not a context for it. And there are two ways I want to think about it. One is called animation and one is called animacy. They're very different things. Animation is defined by a succession of images, and it produces, for example, a cartoon, a succession of images that builds up movement continuously. Already I want you to see right away the analogy with the tall building in architecture. I want you to think about for a moment while I explain this, that in actuality, all of these floors in succession, as they pile up, are producing a continuum, and that this is something like the idea, in a kind of, if you think of a flip book of plans, something like this. Now, animacy is something very different. So you've got animation, which is made of all these shots that generate movement. Animacy is a noun, and the noun defines the state of something in which movement is embodied, liveliness that's intrinsic to an object or a subject. A cat that at any moment is going to rise up and do the stretch in the morning. This is animacy. okay? It's embodied, and it's motivated from within. It's very different than the representation of movement. It's nothing like animation, actually. So is everybody with me? The difference between animation and animacy. Very important distinction. They're both going to be very important in architecture, as I'm going to explain. Now, it's rare that there is a film which is, built up of the succession of images that builds movement, that is about and embodies or makes clear the idea of animacy. Because actually animacy, as I said, is within an object or subject. It's not built over time in the same way. It's immanent movement. You could call it kind of an energy from within that motivates. So it would be difficult to say whether a film is ever, about animacy. I want to just say, though, that the skyscraper idea of the succession, it doesn't develop any narration, typically. It's just an ongoing, repetitive succession. As you know, in a film, when we see these successive frames, we're seeing movement, we're seeing change, we're seeing a development of a narrative unfold. This is not what happens here, so why am I making the analogy? It reaches its ultimate conclusion in these two towers that also have met a terrible fate, finally, later. But you understand, a building in which nothing happens, so to speak. This would be like a film in which nothing happens. There is a film like this, and it kind of analogizes the idea of animacy. And it's this film, or a series of films by Andy Warhol, an avant-garde filmmaker. He made this film of someone sleeping for several hours. By the way, when he did it, it was very radical. People were angry. They were waiting to see the great artist make his first great film, and he torturously asked that people sit through the most boring experience for 5 hours. They were throwing things at the screen. They just couldn't believe that they would be subjected to such boredom, such monotony. They were very frustrated, this audience. Anyway, I would say this movie, in which nothing happens, is the closest to that's what brings about the analogy that I am making with the skyscraper, in which nothing happens, plan to plan. Interestingly, by the way, if you were to sort of move through the plans of those towers I showed you, they would change ever so slightly as you move up, Something would be different, but altogether very little difference. Something like this film, in which almost nothing changes. Now, I want to speak to a very important text that'll help us with all of this. I'm sure some of you know it, Style and Medium in the Motion Pictures by Erwin Panofsky of 1936, 1947. This is one of the greatest texts I've read about a medium of all. It reminds me a little bit of Rosalind Krauss's text or Clement Greenberg's texts about mediums. Others, though, they wrote about mainly painting and sculpture, those. But what they did, and what Rosalind Krauss did, is define what she called the technical supports of a medium. What are those? So, for example, she would talk about how we understand what establishes painting. Well, you all know, we have a frame. We have a space that is illusory, or we have no space at all in the 20th century. We just have a surface. When it was illusory, it was deep, and it was interminably deep, the space that we saw through the frame of a painting. And it exceeded the limit of the frame, etc. Of course, there's paint. There's the evidence of the surface made by the paint, the qualities of the paint, but everything that it depicts and the terms by which depiction and representation happen in a painting, all of the terms by which you build a painting and understand how it functions to make an image, these are the technical supports in her way of describing it. She does the same thing with sculpture, and she does deal with film But this piece by Panofsky talks more historically about the evolution of the medium. And what is the most exciting and most captivating point in his entire essay is right up in the front. It blew me away, which is that he said, and this is what made for me the analogy all the more evident. He said to me that, in his lifetime, of course he's living then in the 30s, there had been no medium. This was the only medium that had emerged while he was living. It is a medium which had not undergone any transformation. It had just been brought about, short-lived as it was, and that what was different about it than any of the prior mediums is that it happened because of a technological development. It was really the result of the emergence of this technology that film came about. And so it is not the willful work, for example, that happens in modern painting. This was a medium that artists had not authored, and they had to respond to it. Okay, I'm going to make a strange case, and I just want you to sort of go along with me for a minute, sort of in this story. Well, first, I would say one more thing about the painters. You know that painting changed radically in the 20th century. They broke with the past technical supports instead of pictorial flat, as I said. Throwing paint on the surface while it's on the floor, Pollock, rather than applying it with a brush delicately and mastering all that is to make the appearance of a space in the Renaissance painting. Whatever it may be, you understand that was a rupture of an extreme break. There's an extreme break that happens with modern painting. But when we're talking about film, there is no such break. There's just a new medium. Okay. Just for a minute, go along with me and imagine that skyscrapers are a new medium. We don't have a name for it. I have this article, I call it successive architecture, the piling up of floors. You can give it some other name. I don't have a proper name. But just for a moment, say that the break between the earlier architecture and the architecture of the tall building is so great that it's a different medium. Okay? It happens by necessity, the emergence of these technologies, as Koolhaas and Tafuri and others have explained so thoroughly. It emerges from technology, this new development. This isn't architects deciding, like the painters did, let's break with the past. No, this is just something else. Something else has happened. Now, when we go up into buildings, we don't walk up great staircases. We go into an elevator. There's no ascent. We arrive somewhere, and we're in the middle of the floor plan. Okay? This is never how it was before. We're in the middle. We are going to move centrifugally toward the perimeter. Architecture had always been centripetal until this new medium. Now we have a new medium, whatever you want to call this medium, that is inverting the prior medium in that way. It's from inside to out. Very different. It's not ascendant. It doesn't have the hierarchy of any of the prior, architecture. The floors are all the same. It's non-hierarchical. It's systematic. It's repetitious. There are so many things different about it that it's a different medium. Okay, we're going to talk more about all the other differences and what they do and what they mean to us. Okay. I want to say a few more things about the analogy and the qualities of that Panofsky identified in film. He said that it emerges not from the artist, but from a folk art sensibility, a mentality. And then that artists will adopt it to make it into an art form, only later. But we need to talk about how remarkable that is. He even mentions architecture. He said that it is alive in the way that architecture is, given that its production and consumption are intertwined. So the whole way of even producing film is nothing like the other mediums of art. I would say architecture also in this new medium of buildings, the tall, is different profoundly. He noticed also that, that it meant that we were engaging with subjectivity entirely differently. I mean, as you can imagine, for a moment, how it is different than their prior. For example, he talks a great deal about the fact that in theater, we are static, the whole setting is static. Now space is moving. We are identifying with the eye of a subject, or not even with some other instrument which we forget. Space is dilating, contracting, moving at great speeds or slowed down. We see whiskers, we see eyelashes, we see flickers in the eye and close-up magnified, and we accept this as real, even though it is never like this. Film is doing something so transformatively different for us. We've all been so acclimated to it by now, we don't even know it. We don't even recognize this. We take it for granted. He called this, he had a name for, I don't remember the name. Hold on, I have it in my notes. There's a word that he had. Oh, damn. I can't find it in my notes now. For this interrelation that finally emerges between voice and movement in film. So this is a great thing, that the two become, but there's of course the period of silent films, which is very different. I'm sure many of you know the wonderful and very cliche narrative, but still very compelling, of Sunset Boulevard, the great performer of silent film, and the obsolescence of the film, of this mode of film, that when it becomes obsolete, only then can she recognize how powerful it had been to only communicate through her face, through facial expression. And now with voice, it's a whole different thing. And she wants to get back to this now obsolete reality of film when it had been only visual without voice. So it goes through stages of development. He tries to track the development of this medium. So too does this new skyscraper medium go through stages of development. I want to start with the real evidence that we are dealing with a change in the medium. Okay, so these are the first efforts to try to absorb the new reality of the tall building. It's being absorbed in the old medium, though, the classical medium, the classical system of architecture. And it's being stretched beyond its limit, or even chopped and piled up. In a way, it could be argued that the classical language of architecture is disintegrating under the pressure of this idea that it should absorb the new medium. It can't. And we're really witnessing a lot of architects who are incompetent to confront that they are practicing the old medium within the new, or the new within the old. They're not reconcilable. After we look at sleep, I meant to conclude this with, I will conclude and try to describe succession, this idea of stacking in architecture and how it advances itself. I'm going to try to track it through the first great skyscraper people. I have a little diversion while we're looking at the avant-garde filmmaker. Warhol is trying to make a film which is about animacy. Sorry to leap back to that initial comparison, which we will return to animacy. But from my perspective, as I've said, this particular film, though it involves succession, which is across time for 5 hours, showing very little happening, is a film that it kind of represents animacy rather than animation. It doesn't develop narrative according to animation, as an animation normally would. I want to point out that there have been efforts among architects to develop animation, not only animacy. And just to quickly show you that effort that happens around this time, or a little later, and earlier. Both earlier and later, here's a painter trying to represent animation, successive movement across time by multiple images that are arrayed although now not temporally, but in a single image. And here's an architect trying to represent animation. Do you know what I'm trying to get at here? It's kind of like animation. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of, imagine if you could just take a film and have a multitude of the images presented to you at once. It's something like this. A representation of what happens in film, but in a still image or in a still form in the case of the Isoman. Okay, now let's, to make clear how animation and animacy play themselves peculiarly in different ways. I want to speak to the idea that when we are talking about the plan as a still shot, if I were to make the metaphor so literally, I just want you to imagine cutting plans through this building, the Guggenheim, or cutting plans through this building by Portman, or this building by MAD, M-A-D, a very recent building. And they all will animate the development of a figure, a continuous development of a figure. And this goes back to the Renaissance when anatomical sectioning would do just that. This is related to classicism in, of course, as you all know, projection and drawing, the making of plans and sections, which are cuts through fixed forms, prior forms, not fixed, forms that precede the idea of the plan. They're ideas that precede plan. Plan is not the generator here. It is an image of a section, horizontal section through something preconceived. There are other ideas of movement in succession like this, where the elevators are actually moving. I'm not going to get into that right now. There's this, a very important example, of course, of the piling up, where developmentally the building is changing as you proceed through it vertically. In fact, this is a fascinating and second iteration of the idea of converging, bringing animation and animacy together, a film by Chris Marker in which a whole series of segments of films of a degree of duration and stillness are one after the other represented and related narratively, but not in a continuous flow as a typical film would be. The cutting is so extreme from one to the next. And indeed, Koolhaas, seeing this in the athletic club, fascinated by the piling of different programs that are unrelated, all together, though stacked up and continuously producing a tower, he makes his own version of this in a building where plan after plan is a very different building. We have this plan. We have a plan like this with two rooms running laterally. We've got a centralized and open space like this. We will have a Paris. We'll have a plan again divided, but now with a ramp and two different zones. Now we have a circular drum as a building plan and a Paris-style hall. It's a whole series of buildings piled up in one's experience. You open the elevator, you're in another building even. He's exaggerating the idea of the succession of the many experiences we feel we are having, as we rise up through the tower. These are not the equal and repeating floors type of tower where nothing happens, as in sleep where nothing happens. This building isn't sleeping. It's more like montage than sleep was. There's another architect doing that. I was fascinated by that idea, and I made a museum that sort of did that with a stack of different floors piling up and generating a continuous motion, in this case, galleries of different relationships to the site in this museum that Ben mentioned. Okay, back to the succession in the city. Of course, we have the recognition that in this idea of, piling the buildings up, just thinking about it as a mere fact, to use just a play on words, some of you have heard of the skyscraper artistically considered. I'm sure some of you have heard about this important work by Louis Sullivan, the first architect to really confront, what am I going to do about this new medium? I mean, he's the one to kind of say, there is this problem, and we've got to find a way to confront it. I want you just to say, well, there were a lot of skyscrapers unartistically considered that produced the city. And that's what this is. the typical plan. These are kind of buildings that just happened. They just pile up space. Somebody tries to cover the whole thing up on the outside. The language of architecture is disintegrating, as I said. That's what we saw already. And so we have we've arrived to one of the fundamental and most troubling of the effects of the new medium. It's not that it's centrifugal. That's interesting, I think. It's not this tension between repetitiveness and differentiation. It's this, that the inside and the outside are now unrelated. This is a big outcome. This is a major effect of the new medium. Because a skyscraper is one thing, and one thing only, one big object, the building. And in it are all of these floors piling up. It's a whole multitude within, and it's a single form without. And forever and a day, this will be the problem of the tall building. Now, big statement, get ready. It's not just a problem of the tall building. It will become the problem for all of architecture. There are many reasons for this. I'm just going to give you one. All but maybe the one-story building. We'll come back to the question of one-story buildings quite a few times later. I'll be showing you some one-stories. But in the multi-story buildings, later we will decide, they must all be accessible, all of them. So if you have two or more, you are in the new medium of succession. You must have an elevator. And you are in a two-story skyscraper. I don't care if you have 2, or you have 10, or you have 100. All of it is in the new medium. Once you have 2, and you are ascending by these means, and you are piling space in this way, the experience of it is this idea. So I want you to consider that. But let's talk about the evolution in the early stage of this type. So here he is. He's basically going to make a building like a column, with, as you know, the base, middle, top. The most interesting thing to pay attention to in Sullivan is the middle, not the base, middle, top. It's the middle only. In the middle are these offices. They're all the same on every floor. And what he has basically inscribed in the facade, the vertical flutes on these giant pilasters of facades, like this is a giant pilaster, this whole front, is the fact that all these rooms are inside stacking up like stalks gathered together. If you take any one of those rooms, it's happening on every floor. It's just a shaft of space. Yes, the floors cut through it, but the verticality is more important than the horizontality. And again he does this. Think of film. There are things that start to happen. The technology is advancing. The methods for confronting how to deal with it are changing. I don't know when voice comes in. We have to see when that is in the analogy I'm making. I'm not sure this step I'm about to take is really, if this step is the voice coming in or not. But this is a big advancement here because Mies is dropping all the rooms. He just has open plans, okay? There's a lot of reasons for that. However, Mies is still in the old idea. I'm going to tell you how. I don't have pictures, I should. He has all the ceilings aligned with the facade. He has all the spaces for workers modulated with the outside order. He has made architecture through and through. In every way, the interior is developed according to the logic of the exterior. So he, like Sullivan, even though he's taken out the idea of the stalking, of the vertical extruding of rooms, he is still manifesting it wholly and thoroughly to the interior. As all of you know, tragically, all of that interior has been destroyed, and everyone just comes in and does whatever they want to now. So it's ill-fated. It doesn't hold up. But at the time it was done, it was still the old idea, architecture as a coherent, reality. Even though the outside is one and the inside is many, there is a synthesis, but that will go away. This architect understood something even more extreme and exciting. We could do away with the base, middle, top completely. Why retain this classicistic memory? Leave that whole medium behind, it's over. This is Saarinen. Maybe he's the first one who finally, he's done. It's over. We don't even have an entry. We don't know where that entry is. There is no distinction made. And the unity is so strong. Look at the right side. This is called the Black Rock by many as a nickname, because when you see it in Manhattan, it is a solid wall, unbroken on the right. When seen in perspective, you don't recognize even where the floors are in it. He has completely canceled the evidence that it's stacking. He's just made it one thing. That oneness of the outside is very important. Maybe the most extreme and final version, though, comes when the idea of extrusion will finally subsume the whole of the tower. And all we have left is the idea of clipping it off, top and bottom. We could extrude interminably. And the extrusion is a profile. That's the Hancock Tower. There were people who tried to extrude horizontally. Very interesting project. Look at the horizontal version by Superstudio of Harry Cobb's tower. There are people later who tried to extrude along a path, not a straight extrusion. Zaha. There's the one story. Don't worry about the extrusion of the one story and the horizontal extrusion. We'll come back to it, but kind of let that hold in your mind a memory that there is another way to extrude horizontally when you're in the one story. But when you extrude multi-story buildings like Pacific Design Center, a very famous building by Pelly, his best work, and that brilliant project by Superstudio. I just want you to think about something for a minute. This is really interesting. Try to imagine the elevator cores that are serving the Superstudio proposal, just for a minute. Feel that. Imagine elevator cores vertically, I'm sorry to use a violent reference, stabbing that beautiful smooth extrusion vertically, cutting it, just chopping. Just put in your mind the elevator cores there and popping out of it. And you will understand that this is an artist thinking about the medium, but that it is absolutely irrelevant. It is absolutely not imminent to the new medium to extrude it horizontally. If it's multi-storied, horizontal extrusion does not make any sense. It's really interesting. It works beautifully on the vertical axis, however. The vertical axis looks something like a scaleless extrusion of a profile. It could be one of those. Any one of those could be a skyscraper on the left. Harry Cobb could have made his skyscraper out of one of these extrusions. Do you know what I mean? There's no scale in this new reality. I mean, once Saarinen made that break, okay, so this is it. This is when the voice comes in. This is a major break that architecture is scaleless. We're going to enter into a new reality with this medium. You understand? It's not just centrifugal. It's not just divorce the inside, the outside. It's not just unity and multiplicity. It's scaleless. And that's something that Loos already understood when he said to himself, oh my God, the only way to have a classical architecture and make it a tower is to adopt a single, element, like column from the Forum, make it gigantic, immense, colossal tower out of a column. He's doing what Harry Cobb did with the modern extrusion. Do you see the analogy between those two? He's holding on, but he's doing it very radically. Loos said if this doesn't get built now, it'll have to get built someday. It's such a great idea. Okay, some other things start to happen. The plan could be any shape now. This is a trauma, if I may put it that way, for the city, for the architect having all of these options in which the totality of the city is no longer making sense according to any regulative principles. The classical now gone, okay? What to do? Some people will adopt a silhouette vertically. These are brilliant ideas, I must say. I should tell you, in my interpretation of these two, these are really interesting horizontal extrusions. Think about this for a minute. Both of them have taken icon, set it up vertically, and extruded it a very short distance in depth. These are actually horizontal extrusions, weirdly enough. Very fascinating idea to do that. Okay, so the city is disintegrated, and of course somebody recognized that. Here he comes again, and brilliantly illustrates that future of the city in which it would just be made of absolutely differentiated identities of buildings, each unto itself, a shape independent from the other, embodying as a symbol this ensemble which is surreal in its totality. This thing on the right, the city of the cap, the globe represents itself. There's sort of two ideas that are really strong in architecture that are coming out of this whole assessment, which is one, a stack of many programs in the single tower, and this, the new emergent autonomy of all of these buildings in the context of the city in which they take any shape, not only extrusion. So there are some of his shapes. He'll make a giant sphere and cut another sphere out of it. Although it's successive, it's all sliced up into floors. Look at that. You know, that's like Los, chopping floors through a column. There's no relationship between all those floors and that shape, that spherical shape, nothing, no. Same thing really here, although, you know, when you're making an opera house, you're in a different situation, obviously, where the freedom of the form might relate to that very special program. But anyway, these are very different ideas, extrusion and shaping. Okay, shift now to the other story. Let me just say, from my perspective, let me make sure I'm right about this. I might do it differently another day, but right now I'll just be very reductive and say that architecture comes in two species. You know, there's the tall buildings starting with 2 stories, public buildings where there's elevators, you know, the whole thing stacking up, whatever scale that may be. They're public, these buildings normally, you know, housing too, but I mean, there's a question of stacking and collecting things into buildings that are collectivizing. And then there are these buildings that make that city. Houses, little buildings, well, 1-story things. Here is one of my favorite ways to make clear this whole story of the analogy that could be made, and it always is, between houses and the whole of architecture. You know how in the Renaissance we look at a villa like the Rotunda by Palladio, and it explains to us what we understand to be the whole of architecture. It's demonstrative of all of the principles in a single house. Of course, there's some architects who've done that in modern. I don't think that was the intention here, but look at this. This is wildly exciting in my mind, which is that we have this tower. This is an anomalous tower because it's not a grid of columns. It doesn't have its elevator in the middle. It's not centrifugal. By the way, the elevator is flanking the whole thing. This is a very exceptional skyscraper. It wouldn't be plausible today for all sorts of reasons, safety being one of them. But this is a 1-story skyscraper. It might be the only really explicit and irrefutable example of a 1-story skyscraper. Isn't that fabulous? He just clipped 1 story out of that. I mean, intellectually, I'm not saying he did this. This is my own idea that he did that. I don't know what he thought, but I'm just telling you, he clipped that. That's pretty fun. Anyway, it's the single-cell house, a single floor of a tower. There is the architect that, of course, made a whole program out of how to confront the new reality, the new medium. And maybe we could just call the new medium the 5 points of architecture. That's not a bad name for it, you know, because it does answer to the skyscraper. You know how it all works, the 5 points, but he understood the ground floor is going to be different than any other. It's part of the continuum of whether it's the city or the landscape, the automobile world, or whatever it may be down there. In the middle, we will have the living space, free to be as it needs to be. Free plan, which is enabled by the structure that lets the walls, you know, liberates the walls from any task of support. And then somewhere way up there, you know, we've got this roof. The roof is the ground transplanted to the roof, translocated to the roof. Okay, so here we are living in this new reality. It's a very horizontal experience. And if we pile up the middle, we would have, that would prove the Villa Savoye is well, I guess you could say it's a 3-story skyscraper. There's the multi-story version of Villa Savoye, in my opinion. You see what I'm getting at. You could pile up the middle plan of Villa Savoye. You would basically understand that it's part of this new idea, represented only in a house. Going back to the shape problem, however, I wanted to just point out to you that there was another thing happening while all this is piling up, which is that in the city, in particular in New York, as you know, when you pile things up that high, other things happen, and one of them will be, that a lot of shadows are going to be cast, and then we must control how they are cast, and we have this thing called the setback, and we have the 1916 code, and this great architect comes along, Hugh Ferris, who represents what to do about it. He exaggerates a future in which these blocks will be so immense, so immeasurable. And now the whole task of the architect in this new medium, this is another big point of maturation and transformation of our medium, which is that we're going to start carving. I mean, we never did that. It wasn't like there was just this immense mass of urbanity that had to be carved away to bring light into it. That's how he narrates it. I think it's possible to perceive these as rock. I call them lithic forms. They're not the same as those. They're arbitrary. The ones on the left are necessary. They're necessitated. They're caused. Koolhaas's are arbitrary. But they reflect on this point that architecture has this shaping as one of its main motivating forces. Okay, a house that analogizes that are a couple of them, and I'll show you a couple. Remember, outsides and insides are unrelated in the new medium. You remember that? I said this was the tragic thing. The outside is one, the inside is multiple. They're not connected anymore. There's this crisis of incoherence in the new medium. This reflects that idea brilliantly. We have this very uniform and singular shape, and we have all these rooms jostling around inside of it. Many, many years later, the people who authored that idea, they recognized it, the decorated shed idea, the whole idea that the building is this shape, that its whole surface is representational. Inside, it's just a shed holding and supporting functions. These architects, these great thinkers, Venturi and Scott Brown, they did a house like that. It's just a sign of a New England house filled up with all this other stuff, rooms juggled around in it. It's not coherent. It is not the old house. They are not just imitating the old vernacular. The outside looks vernacular. It looks a little weird with windows too big, too small. But look in that giant window. You're looking into like something else. You're looking into part of a stairwell. You see it on the upper left? Photograph taken by some students just last week who went to see it on their studio trip last week. Anyway, so this phenomenon of the shaping of architecture and its interior being, how should I put it, in conflict with it in a beautiful way or not. Nonetheless, in conflict, not cohering with it. This is important. I myself was captivated by it. I wanted to expand the repertoire of doing it, invented strange forms like this and made houses. This is one. Sometimes the form was sort of a ready-made. It was given to me. This was a barn in there. Actually, it wasn't given to me. The barn was moved hundreds of miles, and we rebuilt it here, and then built a house around it with a steel frame that would defend it from the wind loads, and clad it as if it's a modern building. Putting windows irrationally for other reasons having to do with the interior. So the inside is motivating something that has nothing to do with the logic of the outside form. Same thing. Look how the inside-outside battle is playing out in a fascinating way in a building like this. And here's another one. This is me trying to do my low house. I couldn't get it out of my mind, the low house, the McKim Mead and White giant gable house. I'm standing on this site, which is unbuildable. I'm often asked to do a project on a site that you can almost not build on for various reasons. And I love those sites. They have so many problems. They motivate what you have to do. Those are the best sites, because then you're forced to do something. So I'm forced into this shape for reasons I'm not going to explain to you now. It's too complicated and tedious. But this house that bends. So this is like low house, but bending and falling down the hill. Like if you imagine a V and then you also make it fall. that's how it looks from across the valley, that photo there. And it's stepping, it's staggered, it's stacked inside. The stacking of the space inside is in friction with this form that's trying to hold it all together, this single form. So it's still like Low House, it's still like the true back of Venturi, Scott Brown. It's disunified inside and out. Okay, hold on to that because I want to try to not continue with that. I want to say something. I want to get out of that problem. And at the end, I'll show you new ideas in my mind that exceed the inside-out dichotomy, that go into what I call isomorphism, of reunifying them. But anyway, before I do that, we got to quickly go through animacy. Okay, animacy, great representation of the idea of animacy, as I mentioned, the cat waking up, or woman turning her head, or we are moving. Well, this is both animacy and animation, because we are moving in cubism around the subject, and the head is turning, both. But there's something that's not happening in Picasso that's very important, that's missing from it, which I think architecture can do, which is more extreme, more radical. Missing in this is that the subject is changing. This isn't a human form that's morphing into something else. It is not that. It is just the representation of time and motion, which is distorting the appearance of this person. He's not representing a mutation of the human form. Okay, now I'm going to show you what that could be in architecture, how change happens, not only movement, but change. This is how architecture does it. Okay, this is a really exciting example of it, and my partner Carl and I have been obsessed with this for years. One day I was riding my bike, in Boston. I'm looking at, one of the many days, and it just suddenly hit me that this whole building has been compressed from end to end. It's not only trying to take advantage of the views by being angled this way, brilliantly as it is. So I want to show you our narration of what it is. This is what we think this building is. It is a building where all the rooms would have normally, if only they could, a view directly of the river. It would be a very long building. And no building could claim so much frontage on this great river, Charles. So, implicitly, it is that straight line that has been compressed. Some of the rooms have been, the pressure is so great that some of them have to move on to the other side. And he brilliantly moves them to the other side where they get other very good views. There are some good views on the other side, but it's limited. And now watch what happens when he makes it. If he had made it a double-loaded corridor, which is a more typical type, they would all have fit within that length. That happened to work out beautifully in our narrative. So we do believe that this building is somehow caught between these two elastic, it's elastically moving between these endpoints. We tested many plans. What it results in when you understand it to be undergoing transformation. So there is a kind of implicit transformation in this particular version of animacy necessitated by the site. This is a more voluntary version, but still compelling in ways that I nonetheless think worthy to consider. You know that he's stretching the sign and moving it with the corner, but there are different radii, there are different curves on the corner. And if you look closely, the brick is as if tearing under the pressure. Look up there. Sorry. Ooh. Do you see the breaking of the brick up there to the right of the ribbon window? The curves are moving away from each other under the pressure of bending according to the site cornering that it's related to, because the big sign is trying to bend less to be seen from further away, and the tighter curve is related immediately to the building at the scale of the corner. I'm going to show you other examples that belong in other periods, because with the cinematic eye that we have now, with the analogy that we understand, it's not fixed in the 20th century. Animacy is something else. It's not lodged in the 20th century. The only thing about it that's 20th or 21st is that we can understand it. But it actually has all been there all along. Okay, here's an example of animacy in the Renaissance, one of my very favorite. The key to animacy is internal motivation and necessitation, what I called causality, something that had to be, was brought into being by a need. Well, this was brought into being by the need that there be a Latin cross plan, a cross plan that couldn't be built because the site wasn't there for it. Look at this plan, and you can see behind the dome, they couldn't finish the cross. They is, a great architect, Bramante. And Bramante, in thereby, is forced to invent the idea of a false perspective to manifest the appearance that this is the plan. This is the plan he's building, this red plan. This is the real built. This is the built reality, which is this illusory, forced perspective into relief. And when you see it obliquely on the upper left, you can see that it is, clearly a distortion. As we move through the building, we're seeing it elastically stretch and compress. You recognize that the building is transforming. This is more like cubism. You'll recall that the head turning looks distorted because of the way we see it turning. Something more like that than it is like the example of the Alto building. Another version of the animacy is just simple distortion. This is forced to distort by the site, again. Here I want you to compare how beautifully comparable it is to the building further off to the east, which is the Woolworth. Look at the difference between the Woolworth and the building in the foreground, which is the Barclay-Vasey building. This is the Barclay-Vasey plan. You can see on the far right how the site has racked the plan into a parallelogram. By the way, this is just a block away from the Twin Towers, which by that point are not racked. They are free from any such obligation of constraint that the site would impose. The site has been cleared of these limitations, thereby making any such pressures a moot point. We should mention that there isn't always a cause. What do we do without one? Here's an analogy to distortion in another world, the organic world. I just want you to see a couple of other examples quickly. Brilliantly, imagining this is a straight bar in your mind. Imagine it stretched. You do an animation and it bends, and you can recognize how the bending is breaking the corners, introducing those, on the upper left, it's something like a mitered corner where the staircase is right on the miter. Alvaro Siza, brilliant building, best building. This is the best building of Alvaro Siza, undoubtedly. Okay, here's a project, mine, where I'm trying now, I'm not trying. I was put into the position of having to make a ceiling, a canopy in a bent space. Thank God it was bent. And so now you will see how the bending of it is generative. Uh-oh. It's not offering me to show you. Oh, that's sad. Oh, darn it. This is an animation of it. And it won't animate for you. That's very unfortunate. Well, you would have seen that there was a canopy that tries to cover this space and gets bent and is forced to fold as it does. Never mind. Okay, that is under the constraint of a site. By the way, it's right across the street from the Barclay-Vasey, this particular element in New York. Perfect siting for the exercise. And this is this synagogue that just opened that Ben visited upon the opening with me. And this will show you how something else is implicit, which is this movement and necessitation that the whole of the synagogue be displaced. Normally, these big congregating facilities try to conjoin the sacred space with what is a function hall in order that they can expand for the very large events like the High Holy Days, mainly. And that would have been what should have occurred. But for many reasons, this was precluded. The existing building would not permit us to attach the sanctuary to the function hall that existed. So we're adding on this thing. There we are trying to attach our new sanctuary. It cannot go here. This was absolutely impossible. So this building had to move here. And for all sorts of reasons that, again, I cannot describe to you in great detail now because it would just be too tedious. Although if anyone ever wished me to do it, I would. I mean, but that's, I would be happy to. It moves. So this is how it moves, and this is where it ends up. And now there were many versions of it during all the, value engineering stages of looking for other ways to do the project, and happily a donor who returns and says, no, we like the better. Please keep moving it and keep dynamizing it. So happily we were able to manifest it like this. There it is in the site. This strange wall, which you will see does a great thing for it. There's the geometry initially itself already with animacy implicit in this scrolling and the development of these two handles on the scroll of the Torah as the symbol by which the form is recognized, and then an interior in which the coplanarity and coextending of these surfaces with a multitude of cylinders, some of them tilted to manifest those scrolls, develop around the seating in a very particular way. And one of the most interesting things we discovered, and I should mention, Carl Dworkin, my partner, is an absolute master in Grasshopper scripting and the development of this kind of animacy computationally, whereas I only build fixed Rhino models on a regular basis. I am crippled not knowing Grasshopper. Just an aside, I think every student should be required to learn Grasshopper and rigorously work it and use it. It's the tool that we should all know. And I know from my personal experience how crippled I am by not knowing it. I feel crippled. I build these models. I call them manual models. My Rhino models are manual, my models, because if anything is wrong, I have to rebuild the whole model. It's torture. Whereas Carl, he will work very hard to script a whole set of relationships, and we can study the variabilities. And remarkably, one of the things that I want you to see here that proves it so well is that it is only the matter of how the chairs are distributed in the space that are determining so much how many aisles, how wide they are. The chairs for some people to sit with arms and others for them with children without arms. All kinds of things are happening in these chairs. And they're so highly determinative. And the seating and the places for wheelchairs and all of that is part of why it keeps changing and how we finally settle on the correct oval. It's not an oval, sorry. I'm sorry, it is, but it's a peculiar one. It's not a pure oval. Anyway, it's a space full of sequentiality for the rituals, and they're all tied to this geometry. It's very much about animacy, but also about, as I've said, the subject's movement in it. Not only the subjects, but the mechanicals and light. This is a kind of interesting study about that problem. The building needed to face east, but we also need to protect people in the morning in certain places so that its experience, it wouldn't disrupt the actual viewing of the bema. Okay. A couple of other interesting implicitly animate projects. This is perhaps our largest single institutional project. It's a large science museum, and there is a sphere in it, which is a planetarium, which is implicitly rolling around in the building. I don't have an animation to prove this to you, but just you have to imagine it. Animacy is imagined. You don't actually have to depict it. It's imminent. I don't need to see the cat stretch to know it's going to. So anyway, the generation of these surfaces that will build this form in which the sphere will revolve implicitly inside. You can see this very exceptional sphere contained in this building. It's kind of like a double dome project. You know domes, where there's an inner dome, which is smooth and refined and representational. It represents the heavens in a church. And the outer dome, which is rougher and more tectonic and coarse in its geometry. That's this outside form. That's the outer dome right there. I'll show you a view where you see both of them together. They're most evidently together, presented at night. Another animation that won't show, sorry. Okay, I'm going to conclude now with these houses I've been working on recently. As I mentioned before, houses are a summation of the problem, or the opportunity to sort of represent the new medium, or whatever medium it may be, and what it brings, and how to make sense of it, and how to understand it. Well, you'll remember that in the house by McKim, medium white with the giant gable, or the house by Venturi with its smaller gable, and there are so many other examples where the inside has a kind of, it's subdivided in friction with the exterior form, like skyscrapers are one thing with many inside. I made that very rough analogy. Of course, there are these other kind of houses, like the Villa Savoye, which are not about a form. They're just about space. And the confining form is just a frame. This is something different. But these shape houses are important for a lot of reasons. I mean, for one, roofs, as you know, they're not normally always, or certainly in certain places, they're not flat. They're not always going to be available to put a landscape on top flatly, even if they are landscaped. They could be sloped. There is another reason they have to slope, and I'm very happy to now have to accept, which is to get our houses off the grid and have our own panels, solar power on our roofs. There are many reasons roofs will slope, as you know. Well, I've been interested in sloping roofs for a long time, so that wasn't an issue. But what I became most interested in the development of houses was this potential for the house to be unified from the inside out, still centrifugal, as we know space to be now in this new reality, not the hierarchical centripetal of the classical period. A house that emanates from within outward moves you from the inside out. And also it is, unlike Venturi, disinterested in the signification of the exterior as a symbol, as a sculpture, or as anything. I mean, just radically to say something that I feel in my gut, I don't really think it matters that much what a house looks like on the outside. It's living in it, and the experience from in to out that is more the shapes our lives and our ongoing experience of the house. The outside is the presentation of it to a public and our imagination to our friends, and it creates an image in our mind of our house. But you know, a house is not really public. This is all kind of imaginary. But anyway, I'm fascinated by the outside becoming immersed in landscape or in urbanity, not being an image or an object, and the inside being its locus. This is one thing. And as you know, I'm fascinated by animacy. I wish for it to have and to embody animacy. Anyway, this house does this in many ways, in my opinion. I'll just show you very briefly that there is a pyramid, a pyramidal roof here, very low, that's tilting. Here it is in section, tilting. You can see it in the model, tilting slightly down to the right. And if you look at it in plan, it's pivoting. You know, the axis here is slightly rotated relative to what is something like a pinwheeling plan. You see what I mean? If you imagine this thing rotating even more, these would move more, these four entities. Anyway, there's an interrelation between the centrality and the peripheral elements. The peripheral elements are outside of this complete and self-contained space, which is the whole house in our imagination. This cross shape. This is the church. I'm working again on, in a way, the Sensatero church, the Bramante church, you remember, that couldn't be fully realized. Now I'm realizing it, funny enough. It's centrifugal, first of all, because you drive in under. It's very Corbusier-like, because we're going to drive in under this house, and we're going to go in here, and we're going to come up, and when we come up, we're going to come up into the middle of it. So we're going to wind our way up here from below and come right into here, and from here go everywhere. So, you know, you're coming up inside the middle in the mind. This is how you would understand it. Okay, so here it is, and this is what it is in the landscape, and this is how it feels inside. Top lit, and very clearly the pivot, the tilt, the sense that the rooms are writhing and the roof with them forced into these positions. Everything is precisely centered on the ends of the T. This is a very careful undertaking. I should have a model showing the transformations. They're all implicit, but I don't have the grasshopper. Carl doesn't work on the houses, I do these all by myself. So if I want one of these models that represents what it's really doing, I would have to ask Carl to make it. It would take him weeks. There's no need for this except to show you and have the pleasure of looking at what it is. But there are so many versions of his house, and I would have to ask him to grasshopper from one to the other, all these models I built. It'll never happen, but it would have been beautiful if it could have happened. But it's there, and I understand it, and I know it to be animate. Anyway, these are the rooms on the periphery of this cross. The bedroom looking almost Hopper-like. This is in the Cape in Massachusetts. And other spaces, the kitchen. And you feel yourself outside of that center. There is also an urban analogy in this house. It's a collection of little buildings gathering around this exteriorized center. Okay, now, if I had to make such a simple version of a house that's unifying with its own internal logic, now I recognize that horizontal extrusion could be so useful, so compelling in a certain way. Never mind, I'm not going to get into detail, but this is such a simple little extruded house. But tilting in this way to let there be a loft on one side and solar on the other. The solar is on the left, the loft is pushing up, the whole gable is tilting and pushing down on the porch. I don't know how to explain all the pressures. There are a lot of pressures building up in this little house. A lot. And, and they're making this all happen. You'll have to believe me. Okay. and this one also. But this one is no longer rooted in the ground. This house is not centrifugal. We're dealing with instability of a ground. We're dealing with flooding. We're dealing with a lot of other problems whereby we should not have a basement. Funny, we're going back to Wright here, where I'm understanding basements are not a good idea in some sites, some parts of the world. It's very top-heavy. There's a lot going on top in this. The attic is the basement. It's upside down in a way. There's this progression here. You see from the left, it's condensing, progressive. Look, see that section on the left? It's getting narrower and narrower on the lower level. There's a series of progressive developments that are animating the experience in this house. There's also an implied spiral in the sequence. Oh, I need more time for these to really tell you why they're good. This is what it is, a house not rooted, a house afloat, a house displaced, a house that may even fall off. As you know, most of these things do come to an end, and you have to shift the paradigm right then. I really appreciate you listening to me tell these peculiar stories. I would love a few questions, though Ben has said we will have what's called Q&A session after this, but we could have a couple of questions now here first. But anyway, thank you so much. Oh, it is. But just a couple here. Could we have a couple of questions for some people who don't want? The seminar idea is so great, and I love those conversations. It's going to be the most exciting part for me. There's a question over there.
Okay.
Jump in.
So I guess so what we've been talking about here is how some people have decided things ought to be more or less coherent from exterior to interior. What were some of the major points of reasoning for these sort of deconstructivist era things, the Isomorphic era stuff, the real postmodern material stuff, Brown stuff, that decided that the the outside did not have to relate to the interior in any way.
Well, I mean, what was the polemic? What motivated them to disassociate?
Yeah.
It's a very interesting argument. Well, there was a kind of theorization that the contemporary world was not any longer expressed by that continuum, by those things that cohere, that there is also loose fitting in the whole way we're living now. I mean, it makes sense that a facade could be shorn off and you could put a new facade on if you needed later to do so. What if the function were to change? Venturi Scott Brown would say, okay, put on a new facade, that's fine. Buildings, that has happened to buildings even. I'm only speculating, but I think they also wanted to represent the new reality, which is that architecture is fragmentary and that we are displaced subjectively. Even in our experience, we're no longer centered in it. We're no longer unified theoretically we wouldn't want to represent a unity that isn't there. The whole of the world is not a unity. So why should a building pretend it's unified, so to speak? I suppose that would have been a kind of reasoning. Why would I be, your question really should be, why would I want to try to unify it again? Oh boy. We can talk about it in the seminar. That was a great question. He's just asking why those architects in the 70s wanted to break architecture up. Yeah.
I have a question about your opinion on the idea of building buildings from inside out versus outside in.
Okay.
I want to know, what are your thoughts on building inside out versus outside in, and how that's affected, how that comes and makes the inside in touch with the building, like you were talking about.
Well, it's interesting the way you're asking, and I was polemical for a minute. I was saying, what really matters is the inside experience. But funny enough, while I'm saying that, I'm kind of telling myself that, but I don't think I believe myself because, for example, and I know this, I don't, so that last house, this one, the reason this looks like this is not because of something I wanted inside. This is a giant solar roof, and we're going to be adding another building on the site, and this is how much we approximately would like to have. And there are no skylights on it because we couldn't make it good for the solar thing. You have to erase too many panels around the skylights. Anyway, I like the idea that the outside, and this is the optimal angle, is a kind of form that has a different task, in this case to be the solar roof. The shape of the whole thing is related to what I want to happen inside, but it's sort of like a coarse-grained version of it. Imagine a photograph, it's low resolution. The outside is like a low-res image of what the inside needs to be. It's just very different, particular and more complicated. It has sequence and multitudes of spaces and other things. But they're both motivated by the stepping progressivity thing, but it unfolds in another way inside. It's inside and out, I must say, finally, in this case. But they're not identical. The coarser exterior and the finer and more delicate and complicated interior. I don't know if it helps you, but the outside has to have a form. I mean, look at the case of the Barclay Vase where it had to be a parallelogram because of the streets. Or the Flatiron Building in New York, which is the shape it is because of the block it's on, that very tight triangle. Sometimes the outside is giving form to the inside. When it isn't doing that, we have to come up with it ourselves. That's hard. Yeah, wow. You know how hard that is. What shape should a building be? Start with that question when you start your next question, next project. Not what style, just what shape should a building be. It's not easy. Yeah.
I guess my question kind of follows what you said. So it's about animacy.
Yeah, animacy.
So it seems like animacy is really posing a new question.
Yeah.
Instead of just giving an answer right away. Or let me rephrase it, animacy becomes a methodology almost. But there must be something that triggers this methodology, right?
Yes.
And what triggers it? Is it the same across the project, or does it depend on the site, the program?
Well, the examples I gave you, they were all independently triggered. The church is triggered by that limitation. The racking is another one. The building that wishes to view the river, every single room wishing to and cannot, and is compressed. From the get-go, it's compressed, and he represents this compression. The rotation in my house, though, this is not necessary, this one. Why does it need to do that? It doesn't. That displacement. That's just wanting it. So that's interesting, admittedly. I think I want it because I want you to feel the pressuring, to feel the rooms causing each other to be the way they are. Simply that. To feel yourself within something animate is all that's making me do it. When I don't have anything else to make me do it, I just have to have it. It's something, and I have to invent a way to make it manifest itself. I don't know how else to answer you. But I will tell you this, look, it works because look, this thing tilts, remember? It tilts. And when it lifts itself on the left, it lets me have my office up there, but it accommodates things. It's pressured by what's inside of it. The way the rooms are developing their relationships and sequences is pressuring the figure to do these weird things. And I wanted those relationships to be right. They need the view there. I want you to be able to talk to people in the kitchen from there. You understand? There are a lot of relationships in there that are working because of the way it is animate implicitly. But the animacy is also in the mind. It's an experience. It's not just functional. It's cohering in our minds. We will perceive it. I mean, when you're in there, you're going to feel that thing turning like that. I'm convinced. You'll know that this thing has turned. You'll have to believe me. I hope I'm right. And then it's been compressed here. Look how this axis is compressed and this one is expanded. So you're also experiencing those things. That's very important. Elasticity is very important in animacy. Stretching, contracting, proportional change. But you can,
Maybe we take
yeah.
one more,
Okay,
and then we
one
do
more.
A 20-minute intermission, and then we meet at 4 p.m. on 403.
One more, and then, or if not now, then.
Yeah.
But somebody who may not be able to come then could ask one now. If someone here, oh, there are two. Oh, wait, okay, student.
I'm interested in this idea of like the stacking of the floors as it presents itself in the exterior of the building, looking at a lot of Sullivan's buildings, and that's all
Sullivan.
very much in plan as an animation. I guess another interpretation of that would be the section in animation, which maybe we don't experience so much. We see, we can see the plan of the building a little more easily than we can the section. And that brings to mind maybe the cohesion of those two is in something like Softy's Habitat. It's sort of the modular where instead of the whole plan is stacking as an individual apartment that moves around space maybe a little bit willfully, but that then doesn't present itself as a stacking in plan or in section, but as a sort of repetitive three-dimensional space instead of a two-dimensional object.
Morphology of pixelation is what you're describing, I believe. You know what I'm saying? Yes. Rather than extrusion. Yes, I recognize what you're saying. And this has to do with aggregation, too. Yes, you're on to another paradigm. There's no question about that. And maybe your question could be to me, well, why are you so prepossessed to only look at the paradigms you're looking at? And I should answer that. And oh my goodness, how am I going to do it? I mean, there's a way in which the pixelation is implicit to the Hugh Ferris, and that's been proven by all the architects like MVRDV or Big or Softy himself. They're making these mountains, those big heaps of pixels. This is significant. Sorry, I'm not sure what to do, except to say one thing that a little bit bothers me about it, I guess. It's actually a surface effect for the most part. When you look at the projects of people like Big or MVRDV, it's only as deep as that pixel can get. And then you're just inside the big heap and you're back to slabs. I mean, Softy's the exception. It's a small mountain. small number of units that are independent completely from one from the other with spaces between. This is a very unusual arrangement, which will rarely be able to play out. Seems to me to be an idea, but not really paradigmatic. It's not like a lot of buildings can absorb all of those voids, and when they get of a certain scale, to a certain scale, I don't think you can have a habitat the size of these gigantic buildings that Big is doing. I don't think you could do habitat like that. I don't think you could have voids all in there is what I'm trying. They wouldn't get any light anymore, for one thing, the voids. So the pixelation is actually a deep skin, in a way, a very deep skin, unit deep or room deep. Okay. I'm interested. I don't know how to put it to you. It's sculpting. That problem of sculpting fascinates. I'm sorry. I'll be thinking about what you're trying to ask me now. I did a whole studio about pixelation, and now I can't remember why. This is it's just a few years ago. I was completely interested in it. What you're asking me, literally. I can't. It's not in my mind right this moment. I'll come back to it. You're onto something. You're undoubtedly correct to ask about this paradigm. It's an important one, and I mean that. By the way, the Alto building is eminently pixelated. I mean, you can imagine the rooms could break out of it to build the curve. The unitized elements are very significantly determining what's happening. So the unitization into pixels is, as I said, imminent. I agree with you. It's an important paradigm, undoubtedly. I just didn't address it. Sorry. Next lecture, I'm going to have to deal with it. Okay.